Clara Whitmore had stopped counting the days since Jonas Heck had bought her from the debtor's court in St. Louis, paid $14 for her like she was a broken plow horse. She had been 19 then. Now she was not sure what she was. Not a woman anymore. Not quite a person. The branding iron had been Heck's idea of permanence. "So you don't get any notions about running," he had said, his voice smooth as river mud. "So every man between here and Santa Fe knows who you belong to." She had not screamed. That was the thing she held on to, the one small victory left to her. When the iron kissed the soft skin beneath her left shoulder blade, she had bitten through her own lip and made no sound. The smell of her own burning flesh rose into the August air like a prayer no one would answer. The mark was a simple H for Heck, burned deep. He had 3 other women marked the same way. Clara had seen them in the mornings, moving through the camp like shadows, eyes cast down, mouths sealed shut. A Mexican woman named Rosaria, a girl who could not have been older than 15 who never spoke, and an older woman, gray at the temples, who sometimes hummed church hymns under her breath as if the melody alone kept her tethered to God. Clara envied them that. She had lost God somewhere around the 2nd month. Heck ran his operation along the western trade routes, selling women, stolen horses, and whiskey to anyone with coin. He was not the worst man on the frontier. That was perhaps the most terrifying thing Clara had ever learned. There were worse men. She had met 2 of them. On the 40th day, or what she estimated was the 40th, Heck made a mistake. He camped too close to Lakota territory. Clara knew this because old Rosaria whispered it to her in the dark, her cracked lips barely moving. "We are past the Niobrara. This land belongs to the Sioux. Heck is a fool or a dead man." "Are those different things?" Clara had whispered back. Rosaria had almost smiled. By morning, 3 of Heck's men were missing. No blood, no sound, just gone like the prairie had swallowed them in the night. Heck paced the camp with his rifle, cursing, spitting tobacco into the dust. The remaining men watched the tree line with white eyes. Clara watched it too. But she was not afraid. She was something far more dangerous than afraid. She was hopping. They ran her that afternoon. It was not planned, not on her part. Heck had taken a rope to her for some imagined offense, and something inside Clara simply snapped like old timber. She wrenched the rope from his hand with a strength she did not know she still possessed and ran. Just ran. Straight into the tall grass, into the blinding Kansas sun, into open country that stretched in every direction like the world had forgotten to put walls on itself. She heard the men shouting behind her, heard the thunder of hooves. She ran harder. The river appeared without warning, wide and dark, and running fast with spring melt from the mountains. Clara hit the bank at full speed and did not stop. She went in. The cold was a physical blow. It knocked the air from her lungs and turned her limbs to lead in 3 seconds flat. The current grabbed her like a living thing, indifferent and enormous, and she went under. She fought. She had always fought. Even when there was nothing left to fight with, she fought with her teeth, with her fingernails, with the last gasp of air in her burning chest. But the river was not Jonas Heck. It did not tire. It did not negotiate. The second time she went under, she did not come back up on her own. A hand closed around her wrist. It was a large hand, warm even in that freezing water, impossibly strong. It pulled her upward with a sureness that left no room for argument, hauling her to the surface like she weighed nothing at all. Clara broke the water, gasping, choking, clawing at air. She was dragged onto the bank. She lay there in the mud and the river grass, coughing water from her lungs, shaking so hard her teeth cracked together. When she finally managed to lift her eyes, she found herself looking up at a man on horseback, or rather, a man who had just dismounted from a horse, water streaming from his leggings, dark hair plastered to his jaw. He was Lakota. She understood that immediately, not with fear but with a strange clarity, the beaded work on his leggings, the way he stood, the two men who flanked him a respectful distance behind on their horses, watching in silence. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately read. Not pity, not hunger, something more careful than either. His eyes dropped to her shoulder, to where the wet fabric of her dress clung to the brand beneath her shoulder blade, the H still angry and pink against her skin. Something moved through his face then, something dark and quiet, like a storm seen from far off. "Can you stand?" he said. His English was precise, unhurried. Clara blinked. Yes." She tried. Her legs failed her completely. She went down on one knee in the mud, jaw clenched, furious at her own body. He caught her before she hit the ground, one arm under hers, solid as a post. He did not make it feel like rescue. He made it feel like steadiness, as though he was simply something to lean against and she had merely chosen to do so. "My name is Chayton," he said. "You are safe now." Clara Whitmore, who had not cried in 40 days, felt something crack open behind her sternum. She did not cry, not yet, but the crack was there. They brought her to the village as the sun fell low and turned the sky the color of a wound healing. Clara had expected to be afraid. She examined herself for the fear as they rode. She had been given a horse, not tied to one, and that alone told her something, and found instead a strange, hollowed-out quietness, like the space after a scream. The village was larger than she had imagined. Tippies arranged in a careful circle, cook fires already glowing in the early evening, children running between the dwellings with the loose-limbed freedom of children who had not yet learned what the world could do to them. Women looked up as they passed, some with curiosity, some with caution. One old woman with a gaze so direct and unafraid that Clara nearly looked away first. Chayton spoke briefly to the old woman in Lakota. The old woman replied. Her eyes moved to Clara's shoulder, to the brand, and her expression tightened briefly before smoothing again into something neutral and assessing. "My grandmother," Chayton said, "she will tend your wound." "It isn't a wound," Clara said before she could stop herself. "Not anymore, it's healed." "Wounds do not have to be open to need tending," he said simply, and moved away to see to the horses. Clara stood in the firelight and did not know what to do with that sentence. The grandmother, whose name Clara would learn was Winona, brought her into a tipi and fed her first. Thick stew. Venison and wild turnip, hot enough to burn her tongue and warm enough to reach her bones. Clara ate with a single-mindedness that would have embarrassed her 6 months ago. Now she simply ate. She had learned not to waste food. Winona watched her without comment. Then she gestured for Clara to turn. Clara hesitated only a moment before she pulled the shoulder of her dress aside, exposing the brand. Winona made a sound low in her throat, not disgust. Grief, maybe. The quiet, private grief of a woman who had seen many kinds of cruelty and had not become accustomed to any of them. She brought out a clay pot of something that smelled of sage and something sweeter, cedar, perhaps, and began to work it into the scarred skin with gentle, practiced hands. It did not hurt. That surprised Clara most. Everything in her life for the past months had hurt. She had forgotten that hands could simply be gentle. She sat very still and let herself be tended and looked at the fire and tried not to think about the fact that she was crying. Silently, without drama, tears simply running down her face in the firelight like the river running, unstoppable and without apology. Winona said something softly in Lakota. "I don't understand," Clara whispered. The old woman patted her unmarked shoulder once, firm, brief, certain. Then she pointed to her own chest and said one word slowly. "Safe." Clara pressed her hand over the brand and closed her eyes. 3 days passed. Clara helped where she could, gathering wood, scraping hides, learning the shapes of words in a language that felt like water in her mouth. The women were cautious with her but not unkind. The children were not cautious at all. A small boy named Chask appointed himself her guide with great seriousness and walked her through the camp each morning pointing at things and announcing their names in Lakota, until she repeated them correctly. She learned fire, water, horse, sky, tree, good, stay. She was learning stay on the morning Chayton sat down beside her at the river's edge, where she had gone to wash her face in the early cold. He did not speak immediately. He sat and watched the water move, and Clara had the sense that he was a man entirely comfortable with silence. That silence for him was not emptiness but a kind of fullness, a thing to be inhabited rather than fled from. "Heck's men came to the eastern edge of our territory yesterday," he said finally. Clara's hand stilled in the water, "looking for me." "Yes." She waited. "They will not come further," he said. "I spoke with them." She turned to look at him then, trying to read his face. "What did you say to them?" Something moved in his eyes, not quite amusement, not quite something darker. "I said that the woman they sought had drowned in the river, that we had buried what the water left behind." Clara absorbed this. "They believed you." "They chose to believe me," he said. "Men like that often prefer a clean story to an inconvenient one." The river moved between its banks. A hawk turned lazy circles overhead. "Why?" Clara asked. It was the only question that mattered. "Why did you pull me from the water? Why bring me here? Why?" "I saw the brand," he said quietly. She went still. "I have seen such marks before," he continued, his voice even, careful as a man walking known ice. "On horses stolen from their people, on cattle driven from land that was not the driver's to take." He paused. "I did not know they put such marks on women." "They do," Clara said. Her voice came out flat and factual. She had learned that tone. It was a survival skill. "It should not exist," he said, with a simple certainty that was not anger but something older and quieter than anger. They sat in silence for a long moment. "I cannot stay here forever," Clara said, though even as the words left her mouth she felt their emptiness. She had nowhere to go. She had no one. She had $14 worth of legal documentation that said she had belonged to Jonas Heck, and a brand on her back that said the same in a language that didn't require paper. "No," Chayton agreed. He looked at her directly then, and Clara had the unsettling experience of being looked at, actually seen, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "But you could stay for a reason other than forever. You could stay because you choose to." "Choice," she repeated slowly, like a word in a foreign language she was testing the weight of. "Yes." He reached into the pouch at his belt and withdrew something small, a piece of worked leather, beaded in blue and white, a pattern she did not yet know the meaning of. He held it out. Clara looked at it, looked at him. "What is this?" "Among my people," he said, "when a chief takes a wife, he does not brand her. He marks himself as hers." He turned his wrist over, showing her a thin scar along the inside, old and silver, deliberately made, so that all who see him know where he belongs. The world went very quiet. "That is," Clara started. "Not a proposal," he said quickly, and there was the ghost of something in his expression, the very edge of warmth. "Not yet. It is only an explanation of the difference between a mark that takes and a mark that gives." Clara looked down at the beaded leather in his outstretched palm. She thought of the iron. She thought of Heck's voice. She thought of Rosaria humming hymns in the dark, and the 15-year-old girl who never spoke, and the gray-haired woman holding onto God with both hands. She thought of Winona's hands, gentle on her ruined skin. She thought of the word safe, spoken slowly, pointed at a heart. Clara Whitmore reached out and took the leather from his hand. She did not say yes. Not yet. There was too much between that moment and yes, too much healing, too many words to learn, too many mornings to sit by this river and remember what it felt like to simply choose.